And this is our Western edition. Good evening. It began as an ordinary school day, and it was almost over when gunfire erupted this afternoon. This deadly mass shooting happened in Parkland, Florida, about 20 miles northwest of Fort Lauderdale at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School, attended by about 3,000 students.
On February 14th, 2018, at 2:28 p.m., Nicholas Cruz dropped his rifle at Stoneman Douglas High School and disappeared into a crowd of fleeing students. 73 minutes later, at 3:41 p.m., Cruz was apprehended in a residential area 2 miles away from Parkland, Florida. Mentally disturbed and obviously deranged, Cruz's motivations were immediately picked apart by the media.
This is a sickness that has infected the country. Unchecked and unfettered gun violence.
Prevention in background checks.
The lack of impulse control that a 19-year-old has.
Long struggle with mental illness and a history of violence.
It's no wonder Americans wanted one distinct reason for his actions. As a culture, we are fascinated by true crime. 44 minutes of dramatic reenactment and interviews that somehow always boil down the complexity of homicide to a singular focal point. Channels such as Investigation Discovery and Oxygen ranked among the most watched channels in 2017 among women. 95 million people famously watched O.J. Simpson race away from police in 1994. It's instilled in us from a young age that criminals are motivated by a singular item, something that makes them snap and go rotten, and it's our job to unmask them.
Just as we thought.
It's the curator, Mr. Wickles.
It's no wonder then that even the president was not immune from pointing fingers for the Parkland shooting.
I'm hearing more and more people say the level of violence on video games is really shaping young people's thoughts.
It's easy to scapegoat video games. From a surface level, video games are oftentimes violent and popular across a sweeping demographic of young Americans. Games like Call of Duty and Grand Theft Auto allow players to brandish weapons and murder civilians at will with little consequence other than having to restart the mission if killed. From a casual glance, it seems obvious. Video games desensitize violence, and playing as a violent character transfers to real life. It makes sense. We are what we eat. After all, we all remember in history class the mass wave of human-on-walrus violence after the Beatles released the song I Am the Walrus and took it upon themselves to skin and wear walrus pelts as a new point of high fashion. Or how could we forget that time that the World Clown Association was temporarily banned in the US as a result of young aspiring clowns putting cyanide in their water-shooting flowers after the Joker was introduced into comic books in the early 1940s? Wait. Hold up. The punchline of these points are false, but the core of it is true. Every generation has a form of media that they use or enjoy that older generations don't understand or care to understand. For the greatest generation, it was rock and roll. Pastors across the nation deemed Elvis, quote, morally insane, tribal, and even going so far as to state he was leading his young devotees back to the jungle and animalism. Similarly, comic books were cited by Frederick Wertham in The Seduction of the Innocent as worse than even Nazism, stating Hitler was a beginner compared to the comic book industry. Reaching back further, we can even see similar claims levied against one of the most revered men in modern society, William Shakespeare. All of these statements are unfounded at best and damaging to society at worst. First and foremost, video games, like any other regulated form of media, have a ratings board. Since 1994, the ESRB has been assigning letters ranging from EC to AO to represent what age should be legally allowed to purchase and play certain games. So, if a parent complains about their 12-year-old wanting to emulate Nico in GTA 4, then it's not the video game's fault for exposure, but rather the parents who supply them with the money and permission to buy said games. Kids aren't stupid though, and could easily trick their parents or steal a credit card number. Not to fear though, because science is here to put to rest this ridiculous argument. Study after study has found no correlation between violence in games and violence in real life. In a series of experiments by the University of York with more than 3,000 participants just last year, it was demonstrated that video game concepts do not prime players to behave in any way, violent or otherwise, and that increasing the realism of violent video games does not increase aggression in game players. This comes at no surprise, as the Surgeon General has asserted for 17 years now that, quote, video games are not a major risk factor for violence. Ironically enough, the surgeon did find a risk in violent and aggressive behavior from, wait for it, television.
That's enough! Dad, that's enough!
If the science is clear then, why doesn't the media move on to something new? Why does the White House, an office that should strive to speak only the truth, remain fixated on a disproven aspect of video games weeks after a national tragedy? Simply put, it's a distraction. Every day the industry defends itself is another spent not deliberating over gun reform or mental health care. And more importantly, every day spent on video game violence is another day removed from national tragedy, until enough time has passed for the emotions behind radical change to dissipate. Video games are simple enough that the debate behind them is easily followed and classified by the general public. The corrupted industry versus the innocent youth. A digital boogeyman who must be defeated at all costs. From gun control and beyond, distractions from progress will only be prevented by personal education. In an era of misinformation and politics as a means of entertainment, it is the job of the public to resist media outrage and call out speculation at its roots. Today, video games are the scapegoat. However, this too will become passé. The name will change. The game will remain the same. But sooner or later, the player will have enough experience to prevail.
God bless all of you and God bless America. We can and we will change the world.